Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our 13th and final episode of our series of candidates and conversations leading up to the 2020 general election on November 3rd. Tonight's event is honored to be hosted by the UC Merced Community Engagement Center and the Office of Government and Community Relations. My name is Jesse Espinoza.
And my name is Lisette Calderon.
And as fourth year
and fifth year students majoring in political science, we are
We are
so
excited to be
excited to moderating the
discussion
discussion tonight. During this series, as we sit behind our computer screens, hearing from the candidates that hope to help build our community's future, it's clear that we are in unprecedented times. Due to the pandemic, we can't gather to engage in healthy debate and discussion like we normally would, so we felt it was important to find a way for members of our community at UC Merced, including students, faculty, and staff, to engage with the candidates running to represent us.
But this virtual format has also made it easier for the UC Merced community to invite our friends and neighbors to join us in the discussion from the comfort of their own home and without having to deal with campus parking. So welcome to all. And please be sure to let your local family, friends, and neighbors know that they are still able to experience all of our past sessions at our official YouTube channel, UC Merced Community Engagement Center. Be sure to reference these videos when filling out your ballot. Additionally, please be sure to remember to turn in your ballot on or before November 3rd. It's really important.
And before we get started, we'd like to pause and acknowledge all local Indigenous peoples. Merced resides on Yoku and Miwok land. We acknowledge the Yoka and Miwok, the native inhabitants of this land. We embrace and respect Yoka and Miwok's continued connection to this region. Thank you for protecting and nurturing this land. Let us continuously acknowledge we live, work, learn, and collaborate on Yoka and Miwok traditional homeland. We will now take a moment of gratitude to pay respect to Yoku and Miwok elders and to all Yoka and Miwok peoples. Thank you. Now let me go over a few housekeeping items. All participants are muted upon entry. We encourage you to use the speaker view instead of gallery view, and we will start with some pre-selected questions for the candidate. Participants can type questions into the chat, and we will get to as many as we can during our allotted time. If you would like to ask your question live, please use the raise hand function or let us know in the chat and we will unmute you to do so. Again, we will get to as many questions as we can during our time. Reminder that this is meant to be a conversation and opportunity to get to know the candidate, so please keep it respectful and on topic. And now, without any further ado, we'd like to get started. Tonight, we have the opportunity to hear from Jim Costa, candidate from California's 16th Congressional District. Mr. Costa, thank you so much for joining us. We can go ahead and get started with some basics. Please tell us about your background and why you decided to run for Congress.
Well, Lisette and Jesse, thank you very much. And the student body at UC Merced, home of the Bobcats, right? To put together and sponsor this forum. I think it's very important that candidates seeking public office have an opportunity to speak with your constituencies, and the University of California at Merced is a very, very important part of not only California's higher education system, but America's higher education system. The students at UC Merced, almost 9,000 now, 70% of you are the first in your family, approximately, to have a university education. And that's terrific. That's really what our higher education system should be all about. And that is educating the next leaders, the future generation of Americans who will have the responsibility to provide the stewardship to keep our country building, growing stronger, dealing with the challenges that we have in this nation and around the world, whether we're talking about the environment, whether we're talking about healthcare, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about the challenges that this COVID-19 has really, in ways that we could not have predicted, kind of taken the Band-Aid off of the systemic racism and social inequities that have obviously existed for decades. When we take our Pledge of Allegiance, we say, in order to form a more perfect union, knowing that we'll never be a perfect union, but the aspiration to achieve that goal is, I think, for 245 years, been a constant of why America is the oldest democracy in the world. Certainly, we have our challenges, and we have had historically that we could talk about. I'm a student of American history. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm a kid who grew up in the Valley and share, I think, a similar story as many of the students at UC Merced. You say, well, how do you share our story? Because, you're a member of Congress. Well, I share that story in a number of ways. My grandparents came to this country as immigrants. They were non-English speaking, and they were illiterate, and really had not much more than the clothes on their back when they came here at the beginning of the 20th century. My father, growing up in Tulare County, on a farm, had to quit school in the 6th grade to help his brothers and with his father to try to save up enough money to buy a small dairy farm. My mother grew up in Kings County, didn't speak English into the 1st grade, and was excited to go to Lemoore High School, and then had to quit as a freshman because her father had been injured in an agricultural accident, both large families, and she had to help her mother raise her 7 brothers and sisters. And so our family were poor. They were campesinos, but saved up enough money to buy a small dairy farm and live the American dream. And what's the American dream? The American dream is a composite of a lot of factors, but it's really the story of immigrants, I think. Immigrants past and immigrants present. And with every wave of immigrants that have come to this country from all around the world, they've come here to have a better life for themselves and for their children. And that's, I think, how we share a similar story. My sister in our family was the first to go to university, and then I followed her later on and went to Fresno State. And I've been blessed, I've been fortunate, and I've had the opportunity to serve as a member of the California State Legislature and now as a member of Congress, working on the critical issues facing our nation at home and abroad. So let's have a conversation about these challenges as students of one of the newest universities in America, research university that has continues to make leaps and bounds in establishing yourselves as a preeminent school of higher learning. I'm so proud of UC Merced and to be able to represent you in our nation's capital. And we work together with your faculty and your student body. We work to support your efforts for research grants for the university because it's really simple. You get a good education and you graduate and you pursue your life dreams and you do well, guess what? Our country does well. And so I've shared that story in being able to be one of the first in our family to go to university. And so I'm so proud of each and every one of you. And not only are almost 70% of you or more the first in your families to go to university, but the majority of the students at UC Merced are on some form of student aid, on Pell Grants. And the majority of the student body are from California, and an overwhelmingly number of them are from the San Joaquin Valley. So when we fought hard to get a new UC campus in the Valley, it was for the purpose of what this institution is fulfilling. And that's why I'm so proud of you and the accomplishments. And I know UC Merced is going to continue to succeed in incredible ways. So let's talk about the challenges facing our Valley our country and the world we live in, because you're the future. And I want to be able to try to answer your questions in the remaining amount of time that we have. And more importantly, I want to hear your thoughts, because I can tell you over the years, whether it's debating in Congress or in committee or meeting in different forums, I really don't learn much from hearing myself speak, but I learn a great deal from hearing students like yourself ask questions and tell me what you're thinking and what you're feeling and your frustrations and where you think we can do better. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for letting us get to know a little bit more about yourself, your priorities, and definitely looking forward to that part of it. And now we can move on to our next question. I'll pass it over to Jesse.
Thank you, Lizette. Mr. Costa, thank you for joining us. So, like you said, we have problems facing our valley. One of them, a walk down Merced's Main Street in the year 2020 will show you a revitalization boom. Historic theaters have gotten new facelifts, new bars, restaurants, and businesses have opened. Pre-COVID, Merced experienced the highest personal income growth of any metro area in the country for the past 5 years. This Central Valley city is beginning to look like a place of prosperity. Yet, 43% of all babies and toddlers in our county live in poverty. Merced's surely a city on the rise, but some citizens are getting left on the ground. What can you do as California's 16th congressional district representative to make sure that prosperity is shared evenly amongst all citizens of Merced County?
Well, as I said on my opening, the social economic disparities we've known for some time. And as a member of Congress, one of my highest priorities is to try to deal and address them. And there's a combination of efforts that I think we must engage in. First, acknowledging that where those social inequities lie in our communities. And while UC Merced has been, I think, doing in part what we hoped it would do, which was revitalize Merced, you go to Planada, you go to La Grande, you go to Winton, you go to communities out on the west side, Dos Palos, and out to Los Banos and other counties within the valley, and you see very high levels of poverty. And it's a combination of factors. First of all, we have educational disparity. And so trying to ensure that our schools, not just our higher education, but our K through 12 is capable of providing the education necessary that you're receiving for all of our communities. And we need to do a better job of getting access. Now, most of the funding for public education in America comes from local sales tax, property tax, excuse me, and the state government. 10% of the funding for public education in America comes from the federal government. So if you listen to someone running for Congress or running for president saying that I'm going to Washington to fix our schools, you should roll your eyes, because that 10% has been pretty constant post World War II, where we provide funding for education in primary and secondary schools, as special ed and Head Start and the school lunch program. And in higher ed, our universities and community colleges, it's primarily student aid, Pell Grants, and also research. And of course, I noted that UC Merced competes effectively with other universities around the country. But we must go beyond, because not everybody's gonna be able to go to university. And so we need to understand that when people graduate from high school and they decide to pursue a separate job set or skill, that they have the education, number one, that gives them the ability to have 12th grade reading, math, and other competency, computer skills. We need to provide job training for people that are going to want to get good paying jobs to help themselves and their families, but may not choose to seek a higher education. We need to invest in our communities. What do I mean by invest? Well, we need to make investments in transportation, in water, and in our schools, and we need to deal with some of the causes of the economic disparities, and that involves focusing on hunger, focusing on homelessness, focusing on issues that deal with teenagers that get engaged in substance abuse and other activities that make it very difficult. And we need to focus on trying to make sure that single family parents have the ability for childcare, and that we deal with the food deserts so that their children can be properly have proper nutrition. So there's a lot of factors that go into play so that not only immigrants but immigrant children can successfully move up the economic ladder, like many of your parents are so proud that you have been able to do, that my parents were proud that I was able to do. But in some ways, we forget. I mean, almost 25% of the families in the Valley are on food assistance programs, and that really reflects the poverty level. So these are all things that we have to do in unison to ensure that people that live in our rural communities have the same opportunities that to escape that level of poverty that is all too often so difficult for them to have those opportunities that I've had and that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. I appreciate that perspective. I agree. It's kind of there's multiple layers that add to the issue. So I agree, and I appreciate that perspective. Lizeth has your next question.
Thank you. And this actually goes a little bit into you mentioning food deserts. When I started my year at UC Merced, it was actually a conversation that was new to me, the idea of a food desert. And on the topic of water and agriculture, and the Central Valley has long been known as the breadbasket of the nation, producing almost 10% of the nation's entire agricultural output. However, as the recent decade has shown, the area is also prone to lengthy drought periods. This loss of surface water has necessitated an ever greater need for extraction in groundwater, and in some cases, a reduction of agricultural operations. What would you do as a congressional representative going forward to ensure that our citizens and farmers in the Central Valley have water access they need to continue being or providing that agricultural production of the nation?
Well, it's a good question, Lizeth. And, California, as you noted, is the number one agricultural state in the nation. And, with over almost 400 commodities that we produce here as really one of the bread baskets of not only the nation, we need to ensure that our agriculture is sustainable. And water is a key element of that sustainability. And so what I like to say is we've got to use all the water tools in our water toolbox. And what do I mean by that? Well, we've got to look at greater water efficiency, and we are doing a lot in that area. We're employing high-tech means for irrigation so that we're not extracting more from our underground supply. We've got to look at trying to provide crops that through research, like at universities at Merced, that are more drought tolerant, seeds that are more effective in that way. And a lot of research has been done with a lot of our agricultural universities. We have passed a law in California 3 years ago that I'm very involved in trying to implement, called the Sustainable Integrated Groundwater Management Plan, otherwise referred to as SIGMA. I try to avoid using acronyms. People think, in your government, well, what's SIGMA mean? Well, it means what it says, trying to sustain and integrate your groundwater and have with the goal, a management plan, so that in the course of the next 10 years and in the next 20 years, we will have a balance between the water we use, surface water that's behind reservoirs like New Exchequer Dam, that's near UC Merced, and taking that water out of the ground, so that in the next 10 years and the next 20 years, we have a balance between our groundwater and our surface water usage. Because if we don't do that, that water supply will no longer be sustainable. And it's like my parents taught me when I first opened up my checking account when I went to university. They say, you can't continue to write checks unless you make deposits. Well, you can't continue to withdraw water unless you bring your groundwater within balance. And the other part of that, using water tools in our water toolbox, is understanding climate change and what the long-term impacts of climate change will be. And the University of California at Merced is doing some incredible research that I've been very supportive of and tried to provide funding in terms of how the climate change is going to impact what is such an important part of our water supply, which is the snowpack we get in the Sierra. I call that snowpack, that starts from Shasta, Mount Shasta, and it goes all the way through Tahoe and down through Yosemite and all the way down to Lake Isabella, Mother Nature's icebox. What do you mean by that? Well, in November we start to get some rain, and then we hope, about 5,000 feet on the mountains, we get snow. That rain turns to snow, and we get a good healthy snowpack for 3 or 4 months, and then in the springtime that snowpack melts, and that's our snow bank, literally, that Mother Nature provides. But what we're learning with the impacts of humans on climate change, that our weather patterns are changing dramatically. And so UC Merced is studying those climate patterns in conjunction with runoff to determine what our longer term water supply is going to be. And of course, forest management also comes into the equation in this discussion of the techniques. And so we measure our water supply now with a growing state of 40 million people. We measure it in 10-year averages. And why? Well, because, 1 year we'll have a very good year above average. And then the next year we'll have a poor year, and we won't have a lot of snow in the mountains. And so we base our water supply looking at what we think the snow conditions are on 10-year averages, and then try to base that on how much snow do we need, how much water do we need for our agriculture, how much water do we need for our communities, our cities, and how much water we need for the environment. The major needs for water in California and anywhere in this country and the world are those 3 areas. And that is for the production of food and fiber. And in California, about 40% of the developed water, that's water that's been developed through the use of canals, reservoirs like the Lake Yosemite right next to UC Merced campus, whether we're talking about larger facilities like Lake McClure behind New Exchequer Dam, or the California Aqueduct on the west side of the valley in San Luis Reservoir. That's all man-made supply. That's engineering concepts that we've developed over the last 100 years. That's what we mean when we say developed water. So when we talk about the developed water in California, agriculture uses about 40% of it. 10% of the water is used by our cities, our municipalities for our human consumption. And about 50% of it's used to try to protect our flows and our rivers, to maintain our environment, our fisheries, and a quality of life. And so I've spent a great deal of time working on the water challenges facing our state and our nation. And of course, we've seen with the recent fires, which have been horrific. This year, we set, sadly, a record that we've got to do a better job of managing our forests, doing land use planning, and focusing on the mid and long term on climate change. Climate change is going to be one of the critical issues facing our state, our nation, and the world. We're going to add 2 billion people to the planet by the middle of this century. And to give you some perspective, we've got 7 billion people today. Think about it, by the middle of the century, another 2 billion people. To give you some more perspective, 200 years ago, we had 1.7 billion people. So that's how much of an impact we as people have had on our planet. And we've got to be better stewards. But I tell you, where water flows, food grows. And as a third generation farmer, I want to ensure the stability of not only California agriculture, but our nation's supply. 4% of our nation's population is directly involved in the production of food and fiber. And it is a national security issue. I truly believe that. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. It was definitely a lot of information relating to our water production that it was really great information to know and to learn more about. We did have a question come into the chat that says, taking care of the agriculture in the Central Valley is something we know is needed. And how will you ensure that agricultural workers and undocumented agricultural workers are protected?
Well, let me tell you, first and foremost, I support comprehensive immigration reform. And when I first went to Congress 16 years ago as a member of the Hispanic caucus, that is our number one priority, comprehensive immigration reform. We came close in 2013 with a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate by 68 to 32. And if Speaker Boehner had been willing to bring it up on the House, I think there were 180 of us Democrats and probably 60 Republicans that would have supported it. It would have passed, and President Obama would have signed it into law. And the immigration issues that we have, the challenges we have with dreamers, with those that have, many that are attending UC Merced and live not only here in our valley, but throughout the country, would have legal status. Last year, we tried to deal with a part that would just focus on the campesinos, the farm workers, under the Farm Worker Modernization Act that my good friend and colleague, Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren from San Jose carried. I was an original co-sponsor of that bill. It would provide legal status to those who work in our farms. It would protect them from deportation, and it would provide legal status. And after a period of time, it would provide those campesinos with green cards, then with an opportunity to have full-fledged citizenship after a period of time. We voted that measure out of the House of Representatives almost a year ago, last December. And sadly, with other good pieces of legislation, it has set on the desk of Senator Mitch McConnell, never to be allowed to even have a hearing in a Senate committee. I will tell you that it will, again, as it has been every Congress, the highest priority of the Hispanic caucus of which I am a member, to pass comprehensive immigration reform. And I'm hopeful that we'll get people who want to do that in the Senate, and maybe with an administration that would support it. Because frankly, it would be better not just to deal with the 700,000, 800,000 farm workers in this country and their families, but deal with the 13 million undocumented people that for all practical purposes, this is the country they want to be their home. And so we ultimately must get away from this horrendous policy that this administration has pursued at the border, that is xenophobic, that has separated children from their families. It's wrong. There's still 542 children that we cannot find their parents, and that's outrageous. It's sinful. And so that's what I've tried to do to protect farm workers. We have in this fifth stimulus package a piece of legislation that will provide a safety net for American agriculture. And I've worked very hard with all the agricultural organizations. But in that $16.5 billion, we provide monies for worker safety, for farm workers, for people working in packing sheds, for people who are working in food processing facilities. We've had problems with COVID-19 and outbreaks, and sadly resulted in deaths. So having monies in there to protect workers is, I think, absolutely critical. And if they test positive, for them to be able to stay at home and to be safe. Most of the people working in agriculture, the workers have modest housing. You have multi-generations in those housing. It's very, very difficult to socially separate. And many of them carpool to work. So a pandemic was never designed, this healthcare crisis that we're all facing was never designed with much of the work that is essential services, and working in agriculture is an essential service, just as many other essential services. But a pandemic, an airplane was never designed with a pandemic in mind. A school like our universities and our primary and secondary schools weren't designed with the pandemic in mind. And much of the agricultural work that is absolutely essential was never designed with a pandemic in mind. And we've learned so much in the last 6-7 months. And so it's absolutely critical that we protect our workers.
Thank you for that. I do definitely agree. I think you made a great point with making sure that in an immigration policy that is passed or presented includes a comprehensive understanding of all 13 million people. Last number I heard was 11 million people. So to now understand that like our immigration population is continuing to grow and make such a huge part of our population in the Central Valley is very critical. So definitely agree on that. And I will.
And you know, those are all folks that are wanting to have this thing that I call the American dream, the dream of immigrants, past and present. And it's every generation of immigrants that has added value of families, of hard work, of a desire to have a better life. And that's what I think is so much that has made America the great country that we are.
Definitely. Thank you for that. I want to go ahead and pass it on over to Jesse.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to pass it over to Priya. I see that she's got a question for you, Mr. Costa.
Call me Jim.
Yeah.
My father was Mr. Costa.
Hi, Jim. This is Priya.
Hi.
How are you? Good.
Good. How are you, Priya?
Good to see you. I like your swag. I like your UC Merced sweatshirt. So thank you for representing UC Merced.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have a quick question. You were talking about healthcare. We talked about food deserts. So one of the things that is also problematic is even before the pandemic, our healthcare system in this valley in Merced was struggling. And this this really brought to light the need for more healthcare workers, more physicians, more nurse practitioners, especially in our county. What more can, I know the medical school's coming and we're getting funding and, you know, that's like maybe 10, 15 years down the road. The need is now. What do we do now? How can we get more healthcare professionals to move to this valley and serve the people here?
Well, I hope it's sooner than that. And as you noted, and let me thank the Lacaretti family for all the support and contributions that you've made, not only to the University of California at Merced, but also to Merced College and to education in general. I mean, you know, it's your story is like a lot of families that have come here and done and had success, and then you give back. And that's part of the American way as well. In this fifth stimulus package, I have $1 billion authorization for regions in the country that are underserved, like our valley, to create new medical schools. And we hope that with UC Merced, with the undergraduate program, that will expand with the medical sciences program that is being part of the development at UC Merced, will be part of a distributed model that will result in a full-fledged medical school using the hospitals, not only in Merced, but in Fresno and our rural healthcare clinics, to create a full-fledged medical school in partnership with the University of California, San Francisco. But you're right, in the meantime, our physician shortage is significant. I must say that if it were not for, in part, over the last 10, 20 years, a lot of immigration that has taken place from physicians from India and other countries, our physician shortage would even be greater. But that's a stopgap method that in itself. We need to provide funding for not only a new medical school, but for nursing training programs, such as they have at a number of our community colleges and at Fresno State. They're not inexpensive, but we have a shortage of nurses, nursing practitioners, as you noted. We need to expand under the CMS program, which is a federal program, the amount of residency slots for some of the existing training programs that we have. I've been working very hard to provide more residency slots so that the existing training program that we have with UC Davis at Modesto, that we have with UCSF in Fresno, and that we have with UCLA in Bakersfield, that we can create more opportunities, especially for students in this valley who would like to become, whether it's a physician, a nurse practitioner, a medical tech person. One of the things that we did in the Affordable Health Care Act 10 years ago was not only expand the access to healthcare, but we provided $8 billion for our healthcare clinics. And so clinics like Golden Valley and Merced, Livingston, and Clinica Sierra, Carmarina, and Madera, they've all expanded their clinics. And in some cases, they put them in schools, which I think is terrific. At Livingston High with Livingston, there's a healthcare clinic. We see that in other capacities where people who live outside of Merced or outside of our other places where there's hospitals, at least you've got a healthcare clinic from, you know, young to old alike, and prenatal care. In Hillmar now we have dental care that's being provided, as well as in Livingston. So those things are all very, very important. So there's not one solution to address the healthcare deficiencies that we have. I think in a Biden administration, we'll fix some of the deficiencies and shortfalls under the Affordable Health Care Act. As Vice President Biden says, we'll move it from Obamacare to Biden care. And he's got a number of, I think, good plans that's going to allow for the improvement of that, so that when we get a medical school, a full-fledged medical school, and I hope not in 10 years, but maybe in 5 years, we'll be able to make up the difference. But again, thank you, Priya. It's a good question, and it's something that I'm working on all the time. with the healthcare community here in our valley. We've made some gains. We've gone 10 years ago from 24% of my constituency having no healthcare insurance whatsoever, and 17% were underinsured. Today, the amount of people in my constituency, in my district, has dropped from 24% with no healthcare insurance to 10%.
Wow.
That's a significant improvement in 10 years.
Yes,
And
yes.
the underinsured has improved as well. But we need to do much more.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you later this week.
Yes.
Thank you for that question. And Mr. Costa,
Yeah.
Jim, I'm sorry. I know. All right. So, Jim, I got a question for you. According to a group of homelessness service providers and advocates, the Merced County Continuum of Care, there were over 600 homeless individuals living within Merced County in 2019. This is an increase of 93 people from just the year prior. Understanding that this is a huge issue with lots of organizations putting effort into it, what should the role of the U.S. government be to deal with homelessness? And what would your specific approach be as a member of Congress?
Well, this is one of the sad commentaries as I open up the many challenges facing our country. And homelessness has, I think, reached epidemic proportions in so many parts of our country. And it's just not the big cities, it's medium-sized cities like Merced. And it's not just our even in rural areas. I mean, you can see it along the riverbanks of the Fresno River and the Chowchilla River, up toward Merced. I mean, people, you cross 99 on your way to Atwater and you see an encampment there. You see some along Bear Creek. And I think it's important when you're trying to solve a problem to understand the multiple causes of the problem. And it's just not the fact that these folks don't have shelter over their head, but when you look at, if you look at like peeling back an onion layer, mental health, substance abuse, alcoholism, which is another form of substance abuse, obviously, and post-traumatic stress syndrome, whether it's a result of folks that have served our country in more recent wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, or whether there's other ways you're subject to the stress of post-traumatic stress, as we've learned from a mental health standpoint, that isn't always associated with members who have been in war theaters. And so we've got to provide more funding and support. I've tried to help the city of Merced reduce their level of homelessness, as I have with the city and county of Fresno. But the cutbacks on social services, especially in mental health programs, really has to be addressed. We need to provide more support there. And we also need to provide more support, not only in the area of mental health, but for those who have levels of substance abuse. And, you know, there's estimated to be 16 to 18,000 veterans every night, people who've served our country, men and women, who are part of the homelessness. Think about that. These are people who've served our country, served in, among the most patriotic of commitments to serve our country in harm's way, and yet they're part of the homelessness every night, not only in California, but around the country. So I have supported funding to provide housing vouchers under HUD, Housing and Urban Development. I've supported housing vouchers for our veterans to be able to sleep and, have access to motels or hotels. But that's a stopgap method until you deal with the underlying causes and a comprehensive strategy to deal with all of the factors that I have discussed. I think we're going to fall short of dealing with this issue of homelessness that impacts the entire country. And it's something we've got to make a commitment to at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. And until we make that sort of a commitment, most of what we are doing is basically at best stopgap. You got to deal with all of the above in a comprehensive fashion to deal with the issue of homelessness in America today, I believe.
Totally. Thank you for that, Jim. And we're coming up on our close here, but Lizeth has one final question for you.
Yes, thank you, Jesse. So our final question will be: in the United States, national debt just surpassed 27 trillion US dollars. And to put that more into perspective, that's the equivalent to over $81,000 per citizen and over $216,000 per US taxpayer. That's an enormous amount of money, and it's only getting bigger as we speak. In fact, it's growing at nearly $100,000 every 3 seconds. And the truth is, the deficit grows tremendously under each party. Is there a way the US government can get the national debt under control, and how do we do it? Or is this just something that'll be a real concern for future generations?
No, I mean, during this pandemic and this recession, we've taken extraordinary efforts to basically create a safety net to try to protect the American public. As my job as your congressman, first and foremost, is to deal with the devastating economic and social impacts, and at the same time protect Americans as it relates to their health and their safety. And that has required us to spend a great deal of money. But and really, the federal government's the only entity that can do that at this point in time. Certainly states and local government are not in that position to do so. As a matter of fact, they've all lost significant sources of revenue as a result of the recession caused by this pandemic. But the debt, as you noted, Seth, and has been growing under Republican and Democratic administrations alike for 2 decades now. It was the last time that we really had it going downward, and we were looking at a level to having it in balance, was under the Clinton administration. And we've lost our way. And I belong to multiple caucuses besides being a member of the Hispanic caucus. I'm a member of the New Dem caucus that focuses on issues of technology and trade. And I'm a member of the Blue Dog caucus. And one of the areas that we focus is on the deficit and trying to get our nation's budget in order. And having been in Congress over the years, I will tell you that for many of my colleagues who talk or complain, and this is a deficit, if we don't get under control, it's you and your generation that's going to have to deal with it. Next year, for the first time, our debt, to add to the numbers you just stated, will exceed our GDP. Over 100%, our debt will exceed our GDP. That is frightening to think about. The last time that America was in that situation was during World War II. And obviously those were extraordinary means. And sometimes you have extraordinary circumstances in which you have to incur that debt. But, I didn't vote for that tax cut that was passed 2 years ago. I don't think it was balanced. And I think it was heavily weighted toward those at the highest income levels. I didn't think it was fair from a number of perspectives. And there was an attempt in the previous administration to cut the level of spending. I will tell you that, whether Democrats are in charge or Republicans in charge, what we see from the numbers is that certain individuals can talk about the debt, but the facts are is that Republicans like to spend money just as much as Democrats like to spend money. They just spend it on different things, and at the same time, not minding our nation's budget. And what I believe has to happen to really take us on a pathway toward getting our budget under control and dealing with these massive deficits that we're experiencing today is two basic concepts. And one of them Democrats have to deal with, and another Republicans have to deal with. And, you know, I'm a big supporter of Social Security and a number of entitlement programs. But Democrats have to be willing to get our expenditures, the money we spend in our budget every year, under some level of control. And Republicans have to be willing to deal with the other end of the ledger. One of it's expenditures, the other is revenues. And Republicans have to be willing to acknowledge that we have to have a certain level of revenues to pay for what we spend. And the only way you do that politically is by both parties sitting down, as they were able to do under President Clinton, and getting an agreement on expenditures and revenues. And those are tough political choices that have to be made. And, you know, one person's, you know, level of spending may be another person's view of wasteful spending. One person's view of a tax cut may be a tax cut that's not paid for. And certainly everybody wants to have lower taxes. But the reality is we have to get a balance between what we spend and the revenues, and agree to keep that in balance for a period of 10 years. And if both political parties are able to reach an agreement on our level of spending, and right now our budget process, I must say, is broken. I mean, we're supposed to pass a budget every year. We passed all of our 11 out of our 12 spending bills back in July. The Senate hasn't taken up one of them. And finally, in September, we had to pass a continuing resolution to keep government funded until December 11th. But some years we've had to pass 2, 3, and 4 continuing resolutions. And sometimes we've seen circumstances when one party has decided to shut down government as a protest. I will tell you that in the 16 years I've been in Congress, I have never once voted to shut down government. That's irresponsible. You're elected to Congress and you're elected to the White House, and your first and primary responsibility is to ensure that we have a annual budget, just like families have an annual budget, just like businesses have an annual budget, just like cities and counties and states have a budget. And these are among the things we have to do to fix this broken budget process that we have in Washington today, and to get an agreement on expenditures and revenues to ultimately correct the debt that you're going to be inheriting if we don't begin to fix it. Good question. I hope I gave you enough background in terms of all of the elements that it takes to fix it.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually just thinking of how in one of my classes we're learning about the revenues and the GDP aspect of it, and just the history of it that has kind of led to where we are now, and where we kind of have to find a balance. So it definitely is a lot of information that as students and myself I can apply in our classes, but I can also see at our real world practices and what's happening on right now. So thank you so much for that response. We
One
are
other
at, oh yeah, go ahead.
is in your class, you ought to take a look at what our expenditures have been to the level of revenues. It's a very interesting aspect when you look at post World War II and our deficit exceeded our GDP, and in the 50s, how we came back, and then the 60s, and look at the level of taxation that we've had over the last 6-7 decades, because it gives you a real interesting perspective of how we've tried to manage our budgets post World War II. And I think that information that would be very helpful as you are pursuing your efforts in class. What's the class you're taking?
It is social policy.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoy the topic. I really enjoyed learning the history of it, and definitely preparing myself a little bit more for now, further conversations. It like you said, it takes a group coming together and really finding out their priorities to, I would say, support the folks that are most impacted in our low income community. So thank you so much for that. And before we end the conversation, we would like to give you a minute or so for any closing remarks. Mr. Costa, Jim, what would you like our audience members to really remember about you tonight?
Well, which background do you like best? This one or being on the campus? I know we all like the campus.
I miss the campus so much, actually. So I'm gonna go with the campus one for sure.
We'll close with us being on the campus because we all would like to be there right now. Let me, first of all, thank UC Merced student body for hosting this forum. I think it's very important, and we'd all like to be there in person, but obviously this coronavirus, this national worldwide healthcare crisis has impacted every fabric of our country and around the world. And we're going to get through this, but we all got to be in this together, and we got to use common sense. We got to follow CDC guidelines, wearing a mask, which I always do when I go outside, protect social distancing, using hand sanitizers, and testing. We're trying to provide more support for all of the above in this next stimulus package. But I want to close by indicating that there's always the politics of fear and the politics of hope. And both, as we've seen historically, have had success by people who have practiced either the politics of fear or the politics of hope. I believe in the politics of hope. I believe in the resourcefulness and the incredible talent of the American people. And I think that the common bonds we share as Americans are far stronger than whatever differences we may have. And so as we deal with this national healthcare crisis, my faith is in each and every one of you, because you're the future. And I know that if we take the short-term challenges that we're facing today, not only with this pandemic, but also look at the longer-term efforts that we need to do to invest in our people, to invest in healthcare, to invest in education, to invest in our infrastructure, and to deal with the challenges of climate change, that our generation and your generation are going to be successful like previous American generations, that when they understood that we were all in this together, and they decided that if we hope to build a better tomorrow, we need to work together to make today's realities, that we address today's realities and not gloss over them. If we do those things, I think we're going to get through this in the next year. We're going to get back on campus. We want to open our schools. We must open our schools as we get our economy back in track. But we can only achieve these goals and reestablish the standing America has had around the world as being the beacon of light. A lot of our allies wonder what's happened to America in recent years. We need to remind ourselves that we can still be that shining city on the hill that President Reagan used to comment on, and that we can build on the success of men and women like yourselves who believe in our country, immigrants from the past, immigrants today, who want to ensure that future generations of America can be able to live that American dream. And that's why I'm running for re-election, because I believe in every one of you. And I have a passion for helping people. The politics, I must tell you, frustrate me on any given day as much as I'm sure they frustrate you and your families. But I do what I have to do in the politics to try to get reelected so I can do what I love to do, which is helping people and solving problems. And so I urge you all to vote. I know we always say that this is a very important election. Well, let me tell you, I've been through a lot of elections. This is the most important election in my lifetime. We've got to restore the heart and soul and the goodness of America and the promise of America. And working together with a strong election next Tuesday, I think we can do that. Thank you. God bless each and every one of you. And go Bobcats.
Thank you, Jim, for letting us get to know you a little bit better and for participating in this. I just want to say real quick to all of our participants, please make sure that you turn in your ballot on or before November 3rd. You can find your nearest drop box at iwillvote.com. Thank you for spending your time with us throughout these conversations. We'd like to give a special thanks to UC Merced's Community Engagement Center and the Office of Government Relations for establishing this program, and to our candidates for engaging with us on the topics that matter most to our community. Thank you, Jim, Costa, for participating in this once again, and thank you all for engaging with us.
Jesse, I would be remiss. Thank you and
Go
Lisette,
for it.
and terrific moderators. But as just as I'm so proud of the student body at UC Merced, I'm also very proud of the faculty and all the people that provide the support to make this one of the top universities in the country. And our new chancellor, who I've had a chance to meet, and I look forward to continuing to work with him. He's got a good spirit, and I think he's going to do a terrific job. So it's obviously the village of UC Merced is first and foremost comprised of the student body, but we know the faculty and all the support staff and the administration and the chancellor are all part of that same team. So again, go Bobcats.
Thank you so much. And with that, this is our last episode. We'll go ahead and give what a great way to close off. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to engage with you all the next time that we can, for sure, definitely. I hope you all have a great night. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and vote.
And